something happens, and immediately your mind jumps to the worst possible outcome. Your boss wants to talk to you. You're getting fired. Someone doesn't text you back. They're mad at you. You feel a pain in your chest, and it's a heart attack. You make a mistake at work. Now everyone thinks you're incompetent. And it's not just occasional, it's constant. Every situation, every interaction, every unknown variable, your brain immediately goes to the worst case scenario. And you know it's irrational. You know you're catastrophizing. You know the odds of the worst thing happening are pretty low, but knowing that doesn't stop it from happening. You still assume the worst, and you live in a constant state of low level dread, waiting for the other shoe to drop. So let's talk about why you do this, and more importantly, how to stop. So, first, let's be clear about what's happening here, because this isn't pessimism. Pessimism is a worldview, it's a belief that things generally don't work out. This is catastrophizing. It's a cognitive distortion. It's your brain taking a neutral or ambiguous situation and interpreting it as a disaster. And it's not random. There's a reason your brain does this. And understanding the reason is the first step to changing it. Because once you see why your brain defaults to the worst case scenario, you can start questioning it. And once you question it, you can choose a different response. But right now, you're not even questioning it. You're just believing it. And that's the problem. So, why do you assume the worst in every situation? Well, the first reason is probably because your brain is wired to prioritize threats over opportunities. This is basic survival programming. Thousands of years ago, the people who survived were the ones who assumed there was some danger, the ones who heard a rustling in the bushes and thought predator instead of wind. If you assumed it was nothing and you were wrong, well, you died. If you assumed it was danger and you were wrong, well, you just wasted a little bit of energy. So the brain learned to err on the side of caution. And that programming is still there. Your brain is still scanning for threats, still looking for what could possibly go wrong, still preparing you for danger. But the problem is, most of the things you're worried about aren't life threatening. They're just uncomfortable or uncertain or potentially embarrassing. But your brain doesn't distinguish between the two. It treats social rejection the same way it treats physical danger. It treats uncertainty the same way it treats a predator in the bushes. So you catastrophize, not because you're broken, but because your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do: protect you from threats. The problem is, it's protecting you from threats that don't exist. The second reason is because assuming the worst feels like control. If you prepare for the worst case scenario, well, you won't be blindsided. You won't be caught off guard. You'll be ready. And that feels safer than being optimistic and getting disappointed, or being neutral and being surprised. So you run through every possible disaster. You imagine every way it could potentially go wrong. You mentally rehearse the fallout. And you tell yourself you're being prepared. You're being realistic. You're being responsible. But you're not preparing. You're just worrying. And worrying doesn't make you more prepared, it just makes you more anxious, because preparation is action. It's actually taking steps to handle the situation if it happens. Worrying is just sitting in the fear of the situation, and that doesn't help you. It just exhausts you, but it feels like you're doing something. And that feeling of control, even if it is false, it's comforting. And the third reason is because you've been hurt before, and your brain is trying to protect you from being hurt again. At some point, something bad happened. Maybe you trusted someone and they let you down. Maybe you got excited about something and it all fell apart. Maybe you were vulnerable and you got hurt. And your brain remembers that and it doesn't want it to happen again. So it prepares you, it warns you, it assumes the worst so you won't be surprised, so you won't be hurt. It makes sense. Your brain is trying to help, it's trying to keep you safe. But what it's actually doing is keeping you stuck. Because if you assume the worst in every situation, well, you eventually stop trying. You stop trusting. You stop hoping. You stop taking risks because why would you? If everything is going to go wrong anyway, why even bother? So you protect yourself. And in protecting yourself, you isolate yourself. You close yourself off. You miss out on opportunities because you're too busy bracing for disaster. And the fourth reason is because you're confusing what's possible with what's probable. Yes, it's possible your boss is going to fire you. It's possible the person didn't text back because they're actually mad. It's possible that the pain in your chest is serious, but possible doesn't mean likely. And your brain treats possibility like probability. It takes a 1% chance and treats it like a 90% chance. And then you respond as if the worst case scenario is inevitable, but it's not. Most of the time, the worst case scenario doesn't ever happen. Most of the time, the neutral or even positive scenarios happens. But you don't see that because you're so focused on what could go wrong that you're not paying attention to what actually happens. And over time, this reinforces the pattern because even when things turn out fine, you don't update the belief. You just think, oh, I got lucky this time, but next time it'll be different. So you keep assuming the worst and you keep living in fear of things that almost never happen. So, how do you stop assuming the worst? Well, the first thing you need to do is recognize that your brain is simply trying to protect you, not inform you. When you feel that surge of anxiety, when your mind jumps to the worst case scenario, don't treat it as a fact. Treat it as a warning signal. Your brain is saying, hey, there's uncertainty here. Be careful. And that's useful information, but it's not a prediction. It's not the truth. It's just your brain doing its job. So instead of believing the thought, acknowledge it. Okay, my brain is catastrophizing right now. That's what it does. But that doesn't mean the worst thing is actually going to happen. Because once you separate the thought from reality, you can choose how to respond instead of just reacting to the fear. The second thing you need to do is ask yourself, what's the evidence? Your brain says they didn't text back. They're mad at me. Okay, what's the evidence for that? Did they say they were mad? Did something happen that would make them mad? Or are you just assuming? Most of the time, there's no actual evidence. You're just filling in the blanks with the worst possible explanation. So challenge it. Ask, what else could this mean? Maybe they're busy. Maybe they didn't see the text. Maybe they're dealing with something that has nothing to do with you, and suddenly the catastrophe doesn't seem so certain. Because there are other explanations, and most of them are more likely than the one you initially assumed. The third thing you need to do is test your predictions. You assume the worst, and then you act like it's true. You avoid the conversation, you don't follow up, you brace yourself for disaster. But what if you tested it instead? What if you asked your boss what they wanted to talk about? What if you followed up on the text? What if you checked in instead of assuming? Well, most of the time, you'll find out that the worst case scenario wasn't even close to reality. And that's important because every time you test your assumption and it's wrong, well, you teach your brain that the worst case scenario isn't as likely as it thinks. And over time, that weakens the pattern because your brain learns that catastrophizing isn't actually accurate and it starts to finally relax. And the fourth thing you need to do is focus on what's likely, not what's possible. Yes, it's possible something bad will happen, but it's also possible something good will happen. Most likely that something neutral will happen. So instead of asking what's the worst thing to happen, ask yourself what's the most likely that will happen. And then for that, not the disaster, not the best case scenario, just the most likely outcome, because that's where you have the most control. And that's where you can actually take action. The worst case scenario is almost always out of your control. So why spend your energy there? Why live in a reality that probably won't ever happen? Focus on what's likely. Prepare for that and let the rest go. Here's what I want you to think about. What's one situation where you're currently assuming the worst? And what's the evidence for that assumption? Not your feeling about it, not your fear, actual evidence. And then ask yourself, what could this mean? What's the most likely explanation? Because chances are the worst case scenario isn't as likely as you think. And you're wasting energy preparing for something that's probably not going to happen. So stop assuming the worst and start looking at the evidence. Start testing your predictions and start focusing on what's likely instead of what's possible. Because you can't control what happens, but you can control what you assume. And that makes all the difference. If this resonated with you, I invite you to join our free community called Beyond Overthinking. I created it for people like you who want help getting unstuck, but find themselves often overthinking. And if you want to work with me one on one, there are options for that too. You can find all of those options at natehooks.com. The link is in the description below. Either way, thanks for watching. And remember, your brain is trying to protect you, not inform you. So don't believe every worst case scenario it throws at you.